Hey, this is Tony from the Cold Case Project, where we focus on unsolved cases across the United States. Our mission is to bring attention to these unresolved mysteries that need your help. All the information we cover in these cases is readily available on the internet, but we rewrite and repurpose it for the purpose of these videos. Our goal is to spread the word about the thousands of unsolved cold cases still out there. Thank you for watching. If you want to help shed light on these cases, make sure to like and subscribe for more content. Your support can make a difference.
Elizabeth Nicole Forshee Seiperta's disappearance became one of Iowa's most haunting cases, taking nearly 2 decades to see justice served. Her case is one of love, betrayal, and secrets that would ultimately lead to irreversible consequences. Elizabeth was born on May 13, 1978, and grew up in Truckee, California, with her parents and younger brother. When she was 13, a man named Michael Seiperta and his wife, Sally, moved in across the street. The couple had 2 young children and needed help with childcare, so they hired 14-year-old Elizabeth as their babysitter. Over time, Elizabeth became deeply attached to the family, particularly Michael, whom she saw as a strong and devoted father. When Elizabeth was 15, tragedy struck. Her father passed away. This loss made her emotionally vulnerable and more dependent on the stability she believed Michael's family provided. Her role as a babysitter became an integral part of her life, and when the Seipertas decided to move to Winfield, Iowa, Michael invited Elizabeth to move with them as a nanny. Elizabeth's mother, Donna Forshee, was strongly against this move and even contacted Child Protective Services to prevent it. However, Elizabeth was determined and left California with the Seipertas. After relocating to Iowa, Elizabeth finished high school in May 1997. Donna attended the ceremony and gifted Elizabeth an emerald and diamond ring, which she cherished. Meanwhile, Michael had divorced Sally and started a romantic relationship with Elizabeth. Despite the significant age gap, he was in his 40s while she was still a teenager. Michael quickly exhibited possessive and controlling behavior. He dictated who Elizabeth could associate with, monitored her every move, and isolated her from family and friends. Her calls to her mother and best friend, Shannon Gerber, became infrequent as she was only able to contact them when Michael was not around. Elizabeth also formed a close friendship with a woman named Tracy Harper through their church. Tracy witnessed injuries on Elizabeth multiple times, finger marks on her neck, bruises on her abdomen, and even saw Michael shove Elizabeth down a flight of stairs. Elizabeth confided in Tracy that she was terrified of Michael, but felt trapped. She stayed with Tracy for a month, but Michael used intimidation tactics, leaving threatening notes, a torn cat collar with a warning, and lingering near Tracy's trailer to pressure Elizabeth into returning. Ultimately, Elizabeth relented and went back to Michael. Despite the red flags, Elizabeth married Michael in January 1998. At the time, they had moved to Mount Pleasant. Tracy, though against the marriage, attended the wedding. After the wedding, Michael completely cut off Elizabeth's access to Tracy. Donna, who strongly opposed their relationship, refused to attend the wedding altogether. In June 2000, Elizabeth briefly returned to California for her younger brother's high school graduation. While Michael stayed in Iowa, he persistently called Elizabeth over 3 days, expressing anger and demanding she return. Concerned for her safety, her friend Shannon tried to convince her to stay in California. However, Elizabeth felt compelled to return to Iowa and boarded her flight. After returning to Iowa, Elizabeth found solace in a coworker named Sarah Thomas, who worked with her at Experian. Their friendship deepened, and Elizabeth eventually left Michael to move in with Sarah. This further enraged Michael, who called their apartment 162 times in just 20 days, leaving threats and insults. He also appeared outside their apartment, yelling and harassing them. On the night of July 16, 2000, Sarah left for work at 10:30 p.m., leaving Elizabeth asleep on the couch. She locked their dog in the bathroom to avoid disturbing her. When Sarah returned at 4 a.m., Elizabeth was gone. There were no signs of forced entry, and Elizabeth had left behind all her belongings, including her ID and purse. The dog remained locked in the bathroom, untouched. Initially uncertain about what to do, Sarah waited to see if Elizabeth would return, but after 24 hours, she reported her missing. The police immediately suspected Michael Cyperta. Phone records revealed that he had repeatedly called Elizabeth on the night of July 16th, but suddenly stopped at 10:56 p.m. and just minutes after Sarah left for work. Investigators also discovered that Michael had not gone to work the following morning, something highly unusual for him. His friend, Jared Crowell, later testified that when he arrived at Michael's house at 5:30 a.m. that day, Michael was intoxicated and claimed that Elizabeth had spent the night but left around 5 o'clock a.m. A search warrant for Michael's house uncovered Elizabeth's cherished emerald and diamond ring in an unlocked safe. Given that she never removed it except for bathing, its presence there was highly suspicious. Police confronted Michael, but he had no explanation for how the ring ended up in his possession. Despite mounting circumstantial evidence, no body or crime scene was ever found. The case grew cold, but Elizabeth's mother never gave up. She placed billboards, ran awareness campaigns, and offered rewards for information about Elizabeth's whereabouts. Over the years, authorities searched 79 different locations for her remains, but found nothing. 17 years later, in 2017, the case was reopened. Investigators re-examined statements and found inconsistencies in Michael's accounts. Crowell's testimony about Michael's intoxication and his claim that Elizabeth had stayed overnight on July 16th, despite Michael denying it in previous interviews, became crucial. With this and other circumstantial evidence, police finally arrested Michael Cyperta in Colorado in November 2017. He was extradited to Iowa and charged with first-degree murder, despite the continued absence of a body. The prosecution's case focused on Michael's history of domestic violence, repeated threats to kill Elizabeth, and his possessiveness. The defense argued that Elizabeth could have left on her own accord, but the court rejected this theory given her lack of activity, no financial transactions, no contact with loved ones, and no attempts to retrieve her belongings. In June 2018, Michael Cyperta was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. However, in 2020, the Iowa Court of Appeals downgraded his conviction to second-degree murder, ruling that while the state proved he was responsible for Elizabeth's death, they did not prove premeditation. As a result, Michael was resentenced to 50 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Elizabeth's family continues to seek closure, as her remains have never been found. Her mother, Donna Forshee, has pleaded with Michael to reveal the location of Elizabeth's body, but he has refused to provide any information. For those who may have information about Elizabeth's remains, authorities urge them to come forward so that her family can finally lay her to rest. Kimberly Doss was just 14 years old when she disappeared in Davenport, Iowa, in 1980 after calling her mother and expressing her desire to return to Houston. Her mother sent her a bus ticket, expecting Kimberly to board and head home. However, on the day she was set to leave Davenport, she called from a rest stop and told her mother that she had met a girl on the bus who went by the name Kathy. Kathy lived in Chicago, and the stop was along the bus route to Houston. Kimberly asked if she could stay the night in Chicago with her new friend, and her mother agreed. That was the last time anyone ever heard from Kimberly Doss. Kimberly was born on February 2nd, 1966, to parents Larry and Linda Doss. She was the second daughter with an older sister named Shelley, just 2 years her senior. The family lived in Davenport, Iowa, with extended family nearby. Linda worked as a waitress, and Larry was a truck driver. When Kimberly was 8, her parents divorced. Shelley later recalled that their parents never argued, and it came as a shock when their mother suddenly packed up and moved the girls to Louisiana. Larry remarried and remained in Davenport, while Linda eventually relocated again, this time to Houston, Texas, where she remarried, expanding the family to include 2 stepsisters. Despite being the youngest, Kimberly was a natural caretaker with a loving and outgoing personality. She was close to her stepsister, but tragically, her stepsister passed away in a car accident years later. Kimberly and Shelley frequently traveled between Davenport and Houston, spending time with both parents. They attended school in both cities and had some level of control over how long they stayed with each parent. Kimberly, however, seemed to prefer Houston. Like many teenagers, she yearned for independence and disliked rules. She often threatened to return to Davenport whenever she and her mother had disagreements. In 1980, Kimberly made good on that threat. One morning, instead of going to school, she had a friend drive her to the bus station. Her mother noticed something was amiss when she found a suitcase hidden in the bushes outside their home, packed with Kimberly's clothes. Shelley believed Kimberly had hidden it there the night before, planning to grab it when her ride arrived. When she didn't return home that evening, Linda realized Kimberly had followed through on her threats. However, Linda didn't immediately contact authorities, assuming Kimberly had gone to live with her father or other relatives in Davenport. Kimberly was particularly close with a boy named Dallas Murphy, a 16-year-old who lived near her grandparents in Davenport. They had a relationship, and many believed he was a primary reason she ran away. For a short time, she stayed with Dallas, but they had an argument after about a week, and she left. Her cousin Wendy saw Kimberly one last time when she passed by in a car with Dallas. Wendy tried to speak with her, but they had argued on the phone previously, and Kimberly refused to talk. Wendy later saw her leave Dallas's house and get into a green car with two men named Frank and Cecil. That was the last confirmed sighting of Kimberly. Kimberly later called Dallas from a friend's house in the Wideview subdivision, saying she was with someone named Debbie. No one in her family or social circle knew a Debbie, and her identity remains a mystery to this day. It's possible Debbie was an alias or a name Kimberly used to protect herself. On March 20th, Kimberly called her mother from a rest stop and told her she was on her way to Houston but wanted to spend the night in Chicago with Kathy. Linda agreed, assuming Kimberly would be home the next day. When she failed to arrive, Linda became alarmed. It was normal for Kimberly to travel between Davenport and Houston, but she always maintained contact. After waiting 4 days, Linda went to the Houston Police Department to report her daughter missing, only to be told she needed to file the report in Davenport. However, Davenport authorities refused to act, stating that Kimberly was likely a runaway and would return on her own. It wasn't until 2 years later, in 1982, that Kimberly was officially classified as a missing person. Adding to the confusion, numerous mistakes were made in her case. Authorities initially listed her disappearance as occurring in 1982 rather than 1980. When she turned 18 in 1984, she was removed from the missing children's database but was never added to the missing adults database. The family fought for years to correct these errors. There were strange developments over the years. In 1984, a Los Angeles-based organization called Thursday's Child, which worked with at-risk youth, believed they had found Kimberly. A teenage girl who had been arrested for prostitution closely resembled her and used the name Kimberly Kathleen Garner. A private investigator hired by the Doss family even claimed it was her. However, Linda and Shelley adamantly denied the girl was Kimberly. The confusion persisted for decades, with law enforcement officially closing Kimberly's case under the assumption she had been found alive. More confusion arose in 1999 when Linda received a sympathy card from an organization called Child Quest, stating that Kimberly had been found deceased in Texas in 1989. The woman they had identified as Kimberly was actually Sharon Nicole Cole, a woman who had used the alias Kimberly Sue Doss. When Davenport authorities were contacted, they had no record of Kimberly's alleged death. It was another frustrating dead end for the family. It wasn't until 2004 that Kimberly's DNA was entered into CODIS and NamUs, allowing for comparisons with unidentified remains. In 2021, a new detective took over her case and uncovered decades of errors, including the incorrect listing of her disappearance date and the false assumption that she was Kimberly Kathleen Garner. The detective worked quickly to correct the mistakes and ensure Kimberly's information was accurately listed in national databases. Despite all these challenges, Kimberly's family continues to seek answers. Her sister Shelley has taken over the search, working tirelessly to ensure Kimberly's case remains active. While new leads have been scarce, the family remains hopeful that with DNA advancements and increased awareness, they may one day find out what happened to Kimberly. If you have any information about Kimberly Sue Doss's disappearance, please contact the Davenport Police Department at 326-7979. Carrie Farver was a 37-year-old woman living in Macedonia, Iowa, a small town just outside Omaha, Nebraska. She was known for being independent, intelligent, and hardworking, with a passion for technology and computers. She worked as a computer programmer and was described as a devoted mother to her teenage son, Max. Despite her strong and loving nature, Carrie had struggled with bipolar disorder, which she managed with medication. Her life seemed to be in a good place when she met a man named Dave Kropa in the fall of 2012. Dave, a mechanic living in Omaha, had recently ended a long-term relationship with his ex, Amy Flora, the mother of his 2 children. He was single and not looking for anything serious. Carrie, who also wasn't interested in anything long-term, seemed like the perfect match for his current lifestyle. They met at an auto repair shop where sparks flew, and soon after, they started seeing each other casually. Around the same time, Dave was also seeing another woman named Shauna Liz Gollier, whom he had met through online dating. Liz was in her late 30s, had 2 children, and ran a cleaning business. While she and Dave had a brief fling, things never became serious, but Liz remained attached to him, often checking in on him and pushing for a more committed relationship. On November 13th, 2012, Carrie was staying at Dave's apartment. She had been working on a big project at her job, and since her office was close to his place, she had been spending a lot of time there. That morning, Dave left for work early, and Carrie stayed behind, planning to head out soon after. Later that day, Dave received a text from Carrie saying, out of nowhere, that they should move in together. This seemed strange to him, as she had always been clear about wanting a casual relationship. When he responded, declining the offer, she suddenly became hostile, sending a barrage of angry messages. She told him she never wanted to see him again and abruptly cut off contact. While Dave thought her behavior was odd, he brushed it off as an overreaction. However, this was just the beginning of a bizarre and terrifying series of events. That same day, Carrie failed to show up for work. Her boss tried calling her, but received no response. Her digital footprint showed she had logged on to Facebook early that morning, but went silent by mid-morning. Soon after, Carrie's mother, Nancy Rainey, received a text from her daughter saying she was quitting her job, moving to Kansas, and cutting off contact with everyone. At first, Nancy thought this was strange, but plausible. Carrie had struggled with bipolar disorder before, and maybe she was going through a manic episode. But as days turned into weeks, and Carrie continued to send erratic texts without ever calling or visiting, her mother became convinced that something was terribly wrong. Nancy reported her daughter missing, but law enforcement didn't take it too seriously at first. After all, Carrie was an adult, and there was digital evidence suggesting she had left on her own. Meanwhile, Dave continued receiving an overwhelming number of messages from Carrie, often hundreds in a day. The messages would alternate between angry and apologetic, often mentioning his interactions with Liz. Liz also began receiving threatening messages from Carrie, including death threats. One particularly chilling message said, "I will make you suffer like you made me suffer." At first, Liz and Dave bonded over their mutual harassment from Carrie. Liz even went to the police multiple times to report the threats, claiming she feared for her safety. She told them that Carrie had vandalized her home, painted disturbing messages in her garage, and even broken into her apartment. Liz seemed terrified and sought comfort from Dave, growing closer to him as the harassment escalated. Then, in January 2013, 2 months after Carrie's disappearance, Dave spotted her vehicle parked in a nearby lot. Police examined the car, but found little evidence, only a fingerprint that did not match Carrie's. The messages continued, becoming more violent and detailed, as if someone was watching Dave and Liz at all times. Carrie would describe exactly what they were doing, where they were going, and who they were with, making them feel like they were constantly being stalked. Months turned into years, and the case remained stagnant. Carrie's family never received a real-time phone call or a physical sighting, only texts and emails. Then, in 2015, a new detective, Ryan Avis, and his partner, Jim Doty, took over the case. As they sifted through the overwhelming digital evidence, something seemed off. While Carrie had been a skilled computer programmer, the patterns in the messages suggested something else, an elaborate hoax. Digging deeper, the detectives uncovered shocking evidence. Liz was behind the entire scheme. She had not only been impersonating Carrie for years, but had also planted evidence to frame Dave's ex, Amy Flora, for the harassment. The fingerprint found in Carrie's abandoned car, it belonged to Liz. Liz had meticulously crafted a digital deception, sending thousands of messages from fake email addresses, creating social media accounts in Carrie's name, and even sending herself threats to appear as a victim. It was all to eliminate her competition and keep Dave to herself. The most horrifying revelation came when police recovered a deleted photo from Liz's phone. It was an image of a decomposed foot with a unique tattoo. It was Carrie's. With this evidence, Liz was arrested in 2016 and charged with first-degree murder and second-degree arson. Despite the lack of a body, prosecutors successfully argued that Liz had murdered Carrie on November 13, 2012, the day she was last seen. Liz had likely killed her inside Dave's apartment and disposed of her body, which has never been found. In 2017, Liz was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. On the morning of May 5, 2011, Amy, an employee at a Subway restaurant in Carroll, Iowa, arrived at work at 8:15 a.m. to find that her manager, 50-year-old Dawn Allen, was missing. Dawn had worked at the Subway for 21 years and had never once been late or missed a shift. Concerned, Amy immediately contacted the store's owner, but there was no explanation for Dawn's absence. Knowing this was out of character, she insisted on contacting the police to report Dawn missing. Dawn's son, Greg, recalled receiving the call from the police and initially thinking of all the usual explanations. Perhaps she had been in an accident or had fallen ill at home. However, as more time passed, it became evident that something was seriously wrong. Police Chief Jeff Kaler, who had known Dawn for over 25 years, described her disappearance as highly unusual. Though there was no immediate evidence of foul play, he did not rule out the possibility. The authorities immediately put out a public notice requesting information, hoping to generate tips and rule out misleading sightings. They also enlisted 4 agents from the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation to assist with the case. Given Dawn's history of reliability and close ties to her family and employer, the circumstances surrounding her disappearance were deeply troubling. Although Dawn had recently gone through a divorce and the sudden death of one of her sons, she was not the type of person to walk away from her life. On the same day Dawn was reported missing, police located her car abandoned in the parking lot of the Piranha Club, a nightclub in Carroll, Iowa. There were no immediate signs of foul play in or around the vehicle, and nothing inside appeared unusual. Investigators later determined that the car had likely been parked there after the club closed at 10:30 p.m. on May 4th, the night before she was reported missing. They did not believe Dawn had ever entered the club. Tracing her last known whereabouts, investigators verified that a neighbor had seen her at her home around 8 p.m. on May 4th. There were no signs of a struggle at her residence or near her car, leaving investigators with little to go on. However, a crucial clue emerged from Dawn's cell phone records, which showed that her voicemail had been accessed around 3:30 a.m. on May 5th. The phone was turned off 2 hours later at 5:30 a.m., just hours before she was due to open the Subway. This suggested that someone, possibly Dawn or someone with access to her phone, had been awake and active during those early morning hours. By May 9th, 4 days into the investigation, police publicly identified a potential material witness, 54-year-old James Snowell, a resident of Ralston, Iowa. Snowell and Dawn had met online in December 2010 and had been casually dating. Greg met Snowell in February 2011 and initially thought he was an average, polite man who treated his mother well. However, Dawn was not looking for a serious relationship, while Snowell seemed eager to deepen their connection. Despite this, Greg said he never noticed any signs of controlling or aggressive behavior from Snowell. When police named Snowell as a material witness, they noted that he might be traveling in Iowa, Missouri, or Kansas in a red Mercury Sable. What the public did not know at the time was that Snowell had been in contact with police in the days following Dawn's disappearance. He had initially spoken with both Chief Kaler and Greg, expressing shock and stating he planned to travel to Carroll to help with the search, yet he never arrived. Over time, it became evident that he was avoiding police questioning. Investigators soon uncovered troubling information about Snowell. He had lied about being separated from his wife. He was still married and living with her. He also falsely claimed to be employed when, in reality, he had been jobless since February 2011. More disturbingly, Dawn's friends and coworkers revealed that Snowell had been controlling and possessive. Amy and other Subway employees recounted how he would make inappropriate, sexually suggestive comments. On one occasion, he had tracked Dawn down at Walmart after she did not respond to his messages. By now, investigators knew they needed to locate Snowell, who had become their prime suspect. They determined he was heading to Kansas and alerted law enforcement there. On May 9th, authorities in Kansas located his red sedan near South Big Creek. Sheriff Randy Rogers, an experienced hunter, knew the woods were a good place to hide and called for backup. As officers surrounded the area, a state patrol plane began circling overhead. Snowell, spooked by the plane, attempted to flee but got his car stuck in the mud. He ran back into the woods, emerging briefly on the south side before retreating again. Eventually, he waited in a South Big Creek, where officers ordered him to surrender. Instead, he pulled out a revolver and fatally shot himself. Snowell's suicide robbed investigators of the chance to learn what had happened to Dawn. While Chief Kaler was initially cautious about publicly stating Snowell's involvement, further investigation made it clear that he was likely responsible. More details emerged after his death. A neighbor reported seeing Snowell sneaking into Dawn's garage the day before she disappeared. This suggested premeditation, as he appeared to be stalking her. Additionally, the hundreds of text messages he had bombarded Dawn with before her disappearance abruptly stopped after May 5th. 2 weeks before Dawn went missing, he had fraudulently deposited $3,600 into his account using a forged check from her credit card. Authorities later discovered that the driver's seat in Dawn's car had been adjusted for someone much taller than her. Snowell was over 6 feet tall, while Dawn was only 5 feet 2 inches. Further confirming his presence in Carroll on May 4th, investigators traced his movements after Dawn's disappearance. He traveled from Iowa to Kansas, then back to Iowa, before ultimately returning to Kansas, where he ended his life. Investigators also uncovered that Snowell had been romantically involved with at least 7 other women behind his wife's back. One woman, Mary, had traveled with him on his supposed work trips. She described him as charming and funny, but later sought therapy after learning the truth about him. Following Snowell's death, authorities searched his vehicle and found guns, knives, cash, multiple cell phones, jewelry, and a Kansas road map. Despite extensive searches in Iowa, Missouri, and Kansas, Dawn's remains were never found. Authorities ultimately declared her legally deceased and believe she was murdered. The challenge of searching for her body was immense. Snowell had traveled across multiple states and hundreds of miles in the days following her disappearance. Chief Kaler acknowledged the difficulty, stating that the case was like searching for a needle in a haystack. In a later interview, Greg described his mother as a kind, hardworking woman who adored her grandchildren and enjoyed reading, bargain shopping, and relaxing in a warm bath. He continues to hope that one day, Dawn's remains will be found so their family can have closure. If you have any information about Dawn Allen's disappearance, please contact the Carroll Police Department at 792-3536 or the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation at 252-5757. Anonymous tips can also be submitted through Crime Stoppers. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, help is available through the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Michael John Delaney, a 35-year-old man from Pierce County, Washington, vanished under suspicious circumstances in late 1999. Delaney, described as an avid gun enthusiast who frequently visited gun shops and air shows, was last known to have been released from the Pierce County Jail on October 27, 1999. He had been detained for 2 days on a minor traffic violation, and following his release, he seemingly disappeared without a trace. His family, not having any contact with him for months, eventually reported him missing in early February 2001, raising questions as to why there was such a long delay before his disappearance was officially noted. In April 2000, approximately 6 months after he was last seen, Delaney's pickup truck was discovered parked near his home on South J Street in Tacoma, Washington. Authorities could not determine when the truck had been abandoned there, or if it contained any significant evidence. The vehicle's presence near his residence did little to provide insight into his whereabouts, but it confirmed that Delaney had not simply left town voluntarily. The delay in reporting his disappearance, coupled with the discovery of his truck, complicated the investigation and left many details unaccounted for. Delaney was known to have been involved in a heated dispute with another man prior to his disappearance, though it remains unclear whether this altercation played any role in his vanishing. Given the lack of evidence pointing toward a voluntary disappearance, authorities strongly suspect foul play. Despite efforts to locate him or determine what might have happened, no substantial leads have surfaced over the years. A search of missing persons databases and unidentified remains across various states, including Washington and neighboring Oregon, yielded a few cases with potential connections. One case involved skeletal remains discovered in Estacada, Oregon, on private land where a property owner had been spraying pesticides in a Christmas tree farm. The remains, found alongside remnants of clothing, appear to have been buried, but later exposed due to environmental changes. The unidentified individual was estimated to be between 20 and 40 years old, standing between 6 feet and 6 feet 5 inches tall, weighing around 200 pounds. While these statistics align somewhat with Delaney's description, no conclusive identification has been made. Another potential match was an unidentified man found in Oregon City, Oregon, in 2002. The remains were estimated to belong to someone between 40 and 60 years old, slightly older than Delaney at the time of his disappearance, but within a possible margin of error. The individual was found wearing multiple jackets, suggesting he may have been homeless or transient. Various personal effects, including a brown leather jacket, McGregor long-sleeved shirt, a coin pouch, and a folding knife, were discovered with the remains. However, as with the previous case, no definitive connection to Delaney has been established. Several other John Doe cases have been compared to Delaney's profile over the years, but none have provided clear answers. Given the geographical distance between Delaney's last known location in Pierce County and some of these discoveries in Oregon, authorities have had to weigh the likelihood of him traveling that far before his presumed death. The challenge in identifying remains is compounded by the limited forensic evidence available and the natural degradation of DNA over time. In an eerie coincidence, another man named Michael James Delaney went missing under different circumstances in Iowa. Though the cases are unrelated, the similarity in names has occasionally caused confusion in missing persons databases. The Iowa case involved a truck and a known person of interest, making it distinct from Michael John Delaney's disappearance, which remains a mystery with no publicly known suspects. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Michael John Delaney's disappearance remain unknown. Anyone with information about what happened to him is urged to contact the Pierce County Sheriff's Office or submit a tip through the appropriate missing persons channels.